I'm very glad to welcome you to the second day of the public program of the exhibition Everybody Talks About the Weather, which, as many of you already know, was organized by Fondazione Prada in collaboration with Niche, the new Institute Center for Environmental Humanities at Foscari University of Venice. I am Cristina Baldacci, a professor of contemporary art at Foscari and the PI of the research cluster Ecological Art Practices at Niche. I'd like to thank the Fondazione Prada and its team, especially Chiara Costa, Cornelia Mattiacci, and Mario Mainetti, for having been such wonderful colleagues during these months of work together. And let me now introduce you our guest speakers of this morning. First of all, we have two guest speakers, as you know, in this morning's session. The first one is Selina Lim, and the second is my dear colleague, Roberta Raffaetta. So Selina, who could not be here with us today, but she is remotely connected, and we won't see her face, but we will hear her voice. So this is, let's say, what matters in the end. So Selina is a climate justice warrior and poet from the Marshall Islands. Crediting her grandfather for her deep awareness of the fate of her home, she has made it her mission to globally raise awareness of the climate crisis. Representing the Marshall Islands at 18, Lim was the youngest delegate at the COP21 and delivered the closing statement of their country alongside the Marshall Islands Foreign Minister Tony de Bruyn. Lim went on to many other global stages to speak on behalf of her people using storytelling and spoken word, most recently becoming a TED speaker at the 2021 TED Countdown Summit. Selina, and this is also important, contributed with a very rich text to the exhibition catalog of Everybody Talks About the Weather. So, we are really very glad that she is one of the contributors of the public program. And Selina, when you're ready, we are here for you, and we are ready to hear your voice, and we welcome you warmly in Venice, although you are in the Marshall Islands. So, Selina, hi, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much for the introduction. Unfortunately, I could not be there, but I am very happy to be tuning in. Before I start, thank you for the introduction. Hello, everybody. My name is Selina Lam, and I am from the large ocean nation of the Marshall Islands. In our mother tongue, we call it Loli Levelap or Island Gainar, which translates to this big ocean or our islands. And so I use she, her pronouns. My clan is Raur, and I am a climate justice warrior and a spoken word performer and a poet, as was mentioned before. And so here I wanted to teach a very quick Marshallese word, Yahweh. It is our Marshallese words for hello, and they are two root words, ya, and kwe. Ya means rainbow, and kwe means you. So our greeting also means you are a rainbow, and it's also our word for love. And so I had wanted to start off with that as a reminder that what brings us together and what brings me here and continue to share the reality of the climate crisis in the Marshall Islands because of the immense love that we, our people, have towards our land and want to continue to bring forth to the rest of the world, because we have to remember that all of us share the same home. We are all from the same planet, and it's important that we work together. And so with that, I will be moving on to my next slide, which will be where the Marshall Islands is. So the map to the side, which is the one dot, that is where the Marshall Islands is. And if you remember, I said we are a large ocean nation. This is what I mean by a large ocean nation. Though we have very few limited land, our country encompasses and spreads over a vast amount of water. And we are located halfway between Hawaii and Australia. And should you travel from Venice all the way to the Marshall Islands, you will be landing on the airport, which is the photo to the left. And this might sound funny enough, it's really not, but this is actually the extended airport. So it was actually smaller than this, and so this is the bigger side after they've done much needed construction to the airport, because it was becoming unsafe, and it was not meeting regulations for airlines to land safely. So this will be where you will be landing, and a lot of people, when they fly into the Marshall Islands, as the plane starts descending, and they just see water on both sides of the window, they start panicking and thinking, am I landing in water? Where exactly are we landing? But do not worry, we have very capable captains who are very familiar with our island, so they will take you in safely and welcome you into our homes. And so please keep in mind the width of the island and the height. You can probably see already that there is not much height, nor is there much width. Oh, and please let me know if I'm speaking too fast. As I am aware, we have a translator there as well. So thank you to our translator as well. So I'll work as best as I can with you. So before I go into the climate crisis and everybody talks about the weather, I thought it was important to bring us back to shortly after World War II, and the nuclear testing that happened in the Marshall Islands. And so the nuclear legacy that we have, this is something that is often not discussed about, and connecting it to the climate crisis, a lot of people don't see the link there, but as we go forth in this presentation, I will explain exactly why these two are connected and why it's so important to learn about the nuclear legacy of the Marshall Islands. So between 1946 to 1958, the United States government, as we were under their ruling by the United Nations, they had tested 67 nuclear bombs in the Marshall Islands. And the biggest hydrogen bomb that the US had detonated in its history is the Castle Bravo bomb, which was dropped on the atoll of Bikini, which some of you might have heard about. So this is the biggest hydrogen bomb the US has ever detonated in their history, and it's the 6th largest nuclear explosion in history. And this bomb, the Castle Bravo, is equivalent to 1.2 Hiroshima bomb dropped every single day for 12 years. And so what was left after all these testing, the contamination that is left behind on the island is very much akin to the contaminations in Chernobyl and Fukushima. And after they had done, while they were doing these testings, our people were taken in, and we were basically much used as guinea pigs. So their doctors were brought in to test the impact on the people who were living on the islands. While they had removed those on these islands where they had dropped these bombs, the people who lived on nearby islands were not informed. And so you will hear testimonies of our nuclear survivors who lived through these bombings. They said when they had dropped the Castle Bravo, they had felt it and they had heard it, and they saw this explosion of lights across the sky. And a lot of the people on the islands came outside and they just saw these white fallouts from the sky. And so the US claims that they had miscalculated the wind when in fact they had actually calculated the wind correctly. They just decided to go ahead with the testing. And so the wind that came once the bomb was dropped spread the white ashes from the bombs to the nearby islands. And people who came and saw these white fallouts, they thought that it was snow. And so they started playing under these white fallouts. They started eating it. And immediately people started getting sick. And so since then, our people have developed a lot of diseases and illnesses, most commonly birth defects, what we call them as jellyfish babies, because they're just innards and they're just on the platter, just pumping. And many other cancers that still affects our society to this day. And the bikini, the testing at bikini also comes in, probably your connection to it has been through these two forms, the bikini bathing suit and SpongeBob. So I'll first start up with SpongeBob. SpongeBob is set in Bikini Bottom. And Bikini is where the Castle Bravo bomb was dropped. And if you can see behind SpongeBob's home, a lot of the homes in SpongeBob, they look like bunkers. And a lot of the characters, if you've ever wondered why a lot of the characters in SpongeBob, they all look weird and deformed, it's because they are all nuclear survivors. And so this whole TV show was based on the nuclear testing that was done in my country. And then we have the bathing suit bikini. When the French designer of the bathing suit was going to launch the two-piece bathing suit, he was thinking of a name and couldn't decide, and that happened to be when the Bravo bomb was dropped. And he saw the reaction that the world had towards the bombing. The entire world was shocked. They were scared. It was a mixture of emotion. And so he thought, okay, this is exactly the kind of reaction that my bathing suit will have on the world once it is launched. Therefore, he named it Bikini after the island. And so all these testings included in this, how it is represented to the world, how we come to know it. One of the many remains of the testing is this dome on Runet Island. And this dome that is called by the locals as the tomb, it is a 18-inch thick dome. And it was actually, that crater next to it is the Ivy King bomb that was dropped in 1952. And this dome contains 3.1 million cubic feet of radioactive material inside. And please remember this, because I will be connecting this back to once we get into our climate, on connecting it to climate change. This dome remains here, and this thick concrete that houses nuclear waste has been there, and there was a sign there that once said, "Do not return for 25,000 years." And so since the bombings, it has been 60 plus years since then. And this dome is leaking and it is eroding. And the other thing about this dome is that it doesn't have a foundation. So the inside of it, it doesn't have a bottom. So when it's high tide, the water inside rises. And when it's low tide, the water inside goes down. And so there is nothing preventing it from connecting to the ocean, the Pacific Ocean around it. So it is in constant communication with our waters that spread with the currents. It spreads everything to different oceans of the world and different shores of the world. And now diving into the climate crisis. So growing up, I'm 25 right now, turning, but the climate crisis has always been there. It has been there for as long as I can remember. Every year when our house would get flooded during king tide seasons, and this is when the waves are at their highest. And keep in mind, on average, the islands are 2 meters above sea level. And they say the highest point on the island, pictured over here, this is Midero, which is the capital where the international airport is at. The highest point on the land, they say it's in Lora, which is one of the villages on the western side of the island. It's at 3 feet. Oh, sorry, 3 meter. It's at 3 meter. And many times when there is flooding, you can see the waves will come in from the ocean side, and they will flood completely the width of the island and then land into the lagoon side. So the water completely washes over the land, and the next day, all the vegetation that was green and alive becomes brown, and they start waning. They start falling apart because they can't contain, they can't, it's difficult for them with the amount of salination that they were just flooded with. And my home is just right by the water, and the seawalls that the men in our village would continuously, every single day when the tide is low, they would be building it up, putting rocks and other big stones on top of it, and then cementing it, would be broken down again and again as they keep building it in order to try to protect our shores and the homes that lay next to the water. And the picture on the right side with the graves, these graves are right next to my house. And so the darker part of the water before it reaches the blue side, that's where the shore is. And the next day, and we also have the seawall over there, but now it's like it's completely swallowed by the water. And so when you come out the next day or whenever the tide is low, you don't just see garbage of people and garbage that the ocean vomits back onto us, but you see bones of people who were once in these graves. Because the waves are so strong, you really feel the impact on the earth as you're standing on it, and you hear everything breaking. And so these graves are broken and torn apart, and the bones, the remainings of the people that were once there, they are now lying scattered along the broken cement and corals and other debris that got mixed in. And so it's a really, really difficult sight for our people to see and have to witness every year, especially for the people whose loved ones lie over here. Thankfully, through efforts to mitigate and adapt towards the effects of the climate crisis, our government has invested in a very good seawall that now protects this area very well. And they've also expanded, they created new land over this side because this was one of the most affected areas during flooding. That land now has become new land and has now become a sports area where our people can go and do running. And that's also where the big micro games, the tournament games between all the Micronesian countries, they will be coming here to compete at. And so that has helped alleviate a lot of the damage that our people would have had to face yearly. And so those are some of the efforts that our people are doing to try to mitigate and adapt to the effects of the climate crisis. But for years, this was what we had to deal with. And especially it's a great relief myself personally, because I have my family members who've recently passed. This is where they are also resting at. So it brings me great relief to know that when I go home, I will still be able to go and greet them when I can, and have a place and know that there is a place that they can rest peacefully at without much disturbance. And so when you're looking over here, as you can see, this is Medjugorje, the capital. That's where 3/4 of the Marshallese population are at. Our population is approximately 70,000 people. That's the total population of the country. And so with 3/4 of that, there's a lot of, our island is pretty populated, and the infrastructure, as you can see over here, 40% of this is at risk to the climate crisis, and 96% of the island itself is vulnerable to climate influenced floodings. And so it is of urgent matter that our people are out there going out and raising awareness and trying to push people to be more demanding and ask that the actions that need to be done within the big countries, developed and developing countries, that needs to be done to ensure that there is a systematic change and there is a global change to then effectively support those who are in the frontline communities in the climate crisis. And since 1993, our waters have risen to 7 millimeters per year, which is twice the global average of 3.6 millimeters per year. And so with 2 meters as the average of the islands and 3 meters, the highest point of just land, flooding and the worry and fear of the continuous rise of the water is immense within our country. And our people continue to find and push for ways to ensure that we are able to adapt to the risks and the damage that are happening and will continue to happen. And next slide of the sort of, we often joke about this in the Marshall Islands. We say, oh, these are the 2 highest points on Medjugorje, which is the dump, the picture on the left, and then the bridge that we have, which is the picture on the right. And because, again, we have very limited space, our waste just keeps piling up. And so at one point, we were saying that it surpassed the height of the bridge right now. And so these two combined, they are probably between 6 to 9 meters above sea level. And so when we get text and warning on the radio that says, oh, go to higher grounds or go inland, we think of either going to 2-floor buildings or these 2 points, which for 3/4 of the Marshallese population, it's impossible for all of us to gather to these points. But I wanted to show these to make a comparison of like what we mean when we say go to higher grounds. These are our higher grounds. There is nothing beyond that. And And that's something that always amazes me when I travel to countries where there's a lot of land and a lot of height. It's always shocking to me when I see mountains or hills. To me, hills are giants, but always like, oh, that's only a tiny hill. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, do you realize what this hill could mean for my people during flooding season? And it's always really shocking and surprising, but this is where the reality of things are different for people, and it's always important to empathize and understand which perspective you are coming from to see then, okay, this is how I might not be affected by the situation, but that does not mean that it does not affect people of other different backgrounds based on where I am in the totem pole of this planet and the systems that we've created for our world. And then for this slide, these are pictures that I had taken of my backyard. The first photo, which is the window to our house, and those grays are people from my family who've since passed. And then this middle photo, which is where the reef that I used to frequent when I was younger, and I would go sit and just talk to the ocean for hours and hours and days. It's a place of great comfort for me, as that's where I would just everything that would well up inside of me, and I just didn't have anybody to speak to. It was on this reef that I would go and just talk to the ocean, and I would think of myself as a lost mermaid that got lost on land, and I would just wish that my tails would grow back so I could go into the water and escape from this world. But that isn't the case. And then the third photo, which is the seawall that had just been broken down, it's the aftermath of the flooding. All of that was one seawall that desecrated, and now our the children and the villagers, they're coming back together to try to build it up before the next flooding. And so these are pictures that I take with me, and I always remind myself that this is my backyard that I am fighting for. A lot of these were taken years ago, and when we would go out into global climate conferences, we are always telling the world, when we are fighting for 1.5 degree and fighting for our planet to bring awareness to the climate crisis and pushing and demanding world leaders to push more to do necessary actions for our planet, we're not just fighting for ourselves, we're fighting for the entire world, because we knew that what was happening in our backyard would soon happen to the rest of the world. And with recent years and right now, this year was the hottest it has been for the entire world, and we've seen floodings and fires and the melting of glaciers in now not just in other parts of the world that were far from the West, but it's now in the Western world's backyard. And this is what we've been warning for years, because we faced these realities for years, and now more and more the rest of the world is coming to feel its impact. And that's why it's so important and so necessary that we all come together to act. And some of the, I was thinking, what are some things that our country has been pushing for people to do to help us with this crisis? And so these are few of the many actions that can be done. Campaign for 1.5 to stay alive. This was a logo that came up with one of our Marshallese climate activists. 1.5 is the threshold for a lot of frontline communities, including the Marshall Islands. Right now, it's already very difficult with the current global temperature. And we've said again and again, based on scientists and research that have been done so far, if we push to 1.5 and past that, many of our islands will become uninhabitable, and it will be extremely difficult. And a lot of people are telling us, well, just become climate refugees. That is not an option we are willing to consider. There are so many there are so many things to consider and to even think about when it comes to what it means to be a climate refugee, what it means then for us having to relocate, who would accept us, how would we live and thrive in these places. There's just a lot of questions of identity and cultural loss, and moving that and funds that and resources that for our people is just not as accessible. And climate education, push for climate education on all levels, and in all parties that are involved. This is not just in school, but also in our workplace, in any other areas where it is necessary to have this education, so that we're all informed and are able to make the necessary changes within our systems and entities to ensure that we are living in a sustainable, equitable manner that is good for not just for our planet, but for those who are most impacted. Just an equitable transition to green energy. These are things that we can push our governments, our local cities, any parties that are involved in the energy sector, push for them to consider and really, really allocate resources to look into ways that we can transition in a way that does not impact those most affected, especially people of color, indigenous people, those who've been systematically oppressed by the systems that have been put in place. This one is extremely important. Allocating funds and resources to frontline communities, not as loans, and including other prerequisites where you're asking, where you have all these artificial barriers where when we're trying to apply for the funds that have been put aside for climate funds, it's difficult for us because there's all these questions and all these requirements that we have to meet. But people who are creating these questions and these requirements forget that the way their society and culture functions is very different from ours. Therefore, something that makes sense to them would not make sense or be applicable to us. And so then that creates a barrier for our people in trying to access these funds that have been created for us to use to help with the loss and damage that we are seeing in our backyard. And then right now, pushing for all state and non-state actors to sign on the fossil fuel treaty. For those who've been following the Conference of the Parties, which is the biggest gathering of all climate negotiators, world leaders, and every involved parties to negotiate on the climate policies. There's no mention of the fossil fuel. And fossil fuel is the biggest threat and the biggest influencer in the climate crisis right now, especially as it's been misused by a lot of destructive companies and countries. And so it is so important. This fossil fuel treaty will ensure that all of the countries and all the state and non-state actors that sign on promise to really ensure that we phase out and not phase down on fossil fuel, because that's so important to tackle and important to address right now. And lastly, I didn't mention, but it's not too late to become a climate activist or going into other issues of social inequalities and injustices that are faced, we all can do something. And it's important that to understand also that the climate crisis, every existing social injustices and social crisis that we have right now, the climate crisis will only amplify those. So everything is connected and ties, the climate crisis ties all of those together and will make it even food security, water security, racial injustice and inequities. All of those are interlinked with the climate crisis and will only be made worse if we don't address the issue as urgently as possible. And right now is our decade of action. It's so important that we bring the attention to this and remind our leaders that by 2030 we have to do as much as we can, because if we don't, then a lot of the frontline communities and countries like mine will be severely impacted. But all of this I bring here today not just to show the that, oh, okay, we can't do anything, oh, it's terrible that this is what's happening, what much can we do? There's a lot that we can do. Some of these things I've already mentioned. There's more that you can find in your own research and from talking to people that you probably might already be connected with. Me being here is also a reminder that the Marshallese community, we have not given up. There is no such thing as giving up. It is important that we act right now. And because we are acting and trying to do as much as you can, then I am asking that you should not too. We want to continue living in our country, living there. And that's why we're focusing so much on adaptation efforts right now, because that's where things have moved us to. And our leaders are working very hard with our grassroots communities, along with and going all the way to the top with people involved in policy makings. There's a lot of collaboration happening right now back home and on international stage that we're bringing the effort to remind the world we are doing something. It is you who also needs to do your part too, and even more so than us, because we contribute less than 0% of the global carbon emission. The rest is majority of it comes from the global north. And the amount of whatever it is that the global north will do with the effort to mitigate and adapt to the climate crisis will make a significant difference in this movement. And so that will be my contribution. I had wanted to perform a spoken word as well, but I'm also mindful of time and was told that there would also be a Q&A. So I'm unsure if I still have that possibility. Otherwise, I can finish here and we can go to the questions, the Q&A section.
No, Selina, I would say that we want to hear your spoken word performance, so please go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just a moment. Thank you so much. Okay. So this spoken word is still untitled, but I was asked to write a letter to the earth. And so it's just been that, a letter to the earth. Ah! Wait. Are you mad? My friends yelled at me once I surfaced. One of the first things you learn as dwellers of the reefs is when the waves come, you plant your feet. Let it take root in the holes and spines of the dead corals. The moment you run, the waves will sweep you off your feet and swallow you. And that is what I did. I ran. That is what you did. You ran. Ocean. Remember, as a child, I dove into your arms with the intention of never letting go, never surfacing. You spat me right back out. I was not to become one of your many gyres. Then for good measures, you dunked me under again as strength suddenly embraced my limbs and I pushed for air, as if to say, did you bother it? That is what I thought. Your 2-meter seawalls could not handle me. What makes you think your 1.5-meter can? When the waves came and tore apart our 2-meter seawall, gaping like the mouth of a dead fish, when the waves came and vomited onto Boo-Boo, Jima, Mama, and Baba, their graves pungent of seaweed and someone's plastic bag, hairpin, tinfoil, Coca-Cola can, hair comb, broom and stick, and anything and everything human, I looked at the ocean. How could you? How could you betray me like this? Disrespect the resting grounds of my ancestors. Isn't it enough that their white bones are poking through the earth? Bones of the dead scattered amidst debris, broken cement, broken corals, the only white flag in this war. Like the white fallout from the radiations, the Bravo bomb, 1.2 Hiroshima bomb dropped every single day for 12 years. A blast and roar so loud it tore my vocal cords of my ancestors, muting them into submission. Flakes on our children's and parents' face and skin as they licked and wonder. Snow! Snow! It is snow! They all exclaimed to one another, excited. Bravo! Bravo! We can play in the snow like angels, and they did become white angels the next second. After vomiting their innards onto the ground, cleansing them of the world's sins, sacrificing Jesus's, like the general said, for the good of mankind and to end all world wars. Like the goats on the ships that God blasted off to. And the world cried in anger, animal abuse, animal abuse. But only silence for my people. So I'll be the loud one today for my people. Bravo! 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 Where were you when the world blew us off the face of this earth? Then the drought came. Lines of us outside stores waiting for water because the city water has been rationed. We prayed for water for months on end till the clouds of your stomach spilled open, raining seas of intestines, filthy rich and of life. We lapped it up like frenzy dogs after a run under the heat. Ocean. The world is asking for hope. From me, my people. Because only I from the front line can only ever know the true meaning of hope. Can I be honest? I am so tired of being exploited. I fight and I give hope to the world, leaving none for myself. What about you? What is your hope? What keeps you going? How are you so resilient? Fuck. I just want to survive. Thank you. Muy padre.
So, Selina, thank you so much for this important and moving also testimony about the reality, the climate reality of the Marshall Islands. And of course, you significantly titled your contribution 1.5 degrees to stay alive. So, and you showed us, so I'm really moved also and thankful because you started with words of love on care, and then you also ended with words of hope. So it's not too late to take action, as you just told us. And it's important, I think, also that you mentioned in your list of needed actions, the second, let's say, action, important action or urgent action we need to do is, let's say, about climate education. So I think also that this public program around the exhibition and the exhibition itself is a way also through words, through images, to, of course, educate people and especially young people. And so this morning section connects also different, let's say, archipelagos around the world. So you spoke of the Marshall Islands, and we are also very grateful that you showed pictures that we usually don't see about the Marshall Islands, so and about the islands in the Pacific. So we are used to see pictures of beautiful places, beautiful settings, but you showed also what is really happening there, and you told us also what's happening. Education, and as you know, so our next speaker is going to focus on Hawaii, so another archipelago in the Pacific, and of course Venice is another archipelago. So many of the questions your speech arose are, we feel them deeply in Venice as well. So if there are, I would say, if there are any urgent questions for Selina, because I don't know, so the reason why we can't see her is that her internet connection is very low. So I don't know if she will be staying until the end of the morning. I hope so, because I would say if there are questions or comments in our audience for Selina, I would take one or two immediately for her. Otherwise, yes, there is one. You need to speak in the mic so Selina can hear you. So Selina, there is one question for you by Barbara Casavecchia, Ocean Space.
Hello, Selina. Thank you so much.
Hello.
Hi. Across time and space. The question is about, what's going on with deep sea mining, because it's another urgent issue, I'm afraid. Extractive activities, unfortunately, never stop, and exploitation doesn't either. So I wonder if you could tell us what's going on under that respect in the Marshall Islands and the sort of near parts of your ocean nations.
Mm-hmm. Yes. For the deep sea mining, that is not happening in the Marshall Islands, but it is happening in other countries within the Pacific. And unfortunately, I do not know much about the topic. That it's not my area of expertise, so I can't really give you good information or the right information on that. But it is definitely a big concern for the rest of the Pacific right now, and trying to. It's also the extractive companies that are coming in with the with like monies and incentives that would then entice the people and, things that they can use these money for to help build the infrastructure of the country and the communities. And so it's definitely something that people need to be educated on for the impacts that it would have on the long run if it is something that is going to be continued on for years to come.
Thank you. Yes, there is another question for you, Selina.
Hi, Selina.
Yeah.
My name is Bjorn Stevens from the Max Planck Institute in Hamburg. And your presentation raised a question on my mind, which I struggle with, which is how you imagine the opposing needs in some ways of development for energy, because societies and people need energy, and the difficulty small nations have in managing their own energy resources. So I was just looking at the Marshall Islands, and I think right now about 2% of your energy is from renewables, and the goal is to be completely renewable by 2050. But at the same time, a typical Marshall Islander uses, it seems like about 20% of the amount of energy, say, of a typical European. So it seems on one hand, you need a lot more energy. On the other hand, you have a lot of resources which are renewable, but that also imposes a dependency on you. And so how do you see those conflicting issues and the way out?
Yes, thank you for the question. So about 90% of the country has now they are all using renewable energy. So this is mainly the using solar panels. And so that has been converted, but definitely because we are an island country that is far out into the water. Again, we don't have a lot of resources. And so that definitely is then there becomes that dependency on the other countries that we have partnerships with or diplomatic ties with. And so, but we still continue to find other ways. And right now, one of the things that we are looking at is the seafaring or the use of shipping, because that is also one of the things that contributes greatly to our global, to our carbon emissions. And everything, majority of the things that that is needed on the island needs to be shipped over. And so we're working with organizations and other partners to try to find ways incorporating our indigenous knowledge of seafaring. And so that's using the ocean, the waves, the wind, and other tools that our ancestors had used to be able to sail through the waters back in the. So these are some of the ways we're working to incorporate indigenous knowledge with current modern technologies, so that our country will become less and less dependent on outside or energy sources that contributes greatly to the climate crisis. But yes, it is definitely something that is an issue and continues to be addressed by our people. And there's many ways that we've been looking into to try to incorporate all of that. And one of those has been through the use of indigenous knowledge and practices.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments for Selina? No, then we would really, really like to thank you again. Stay with us if you can. We will have time for a final Q&A at the end of the session. So it would be also great if our next speaker, Roberta Raffaetta, whom I invite to join us to the podium, can be in dialogue then with you at the end of the morning session. Let's see if that can happen. So I'd like you now to introduce Roberta Raffaetta, who is an anthropologist and professor of sociocultural anthropology. Her research stays at the intersection of medical anthropology, environmental anthropology, and science and technology studies. She studies how to live well and caring for each other in an entangled and more than human planet. In last years, she has explored how biocomputational scientists produce knowledge about microbes and why this matters. Roberta is the PI of the ERC Starting Grant Project's Health X-Cross, a multi-sided comparative ethnographic study of how technoscience is reconfiguring practices and ideas of health by aggregating microbial data across time, space, and species. And Roberta, last but not least, is also the deputy director of NICHE. So Roberta, welcome. Your talk is entitled Rethinking Climate from Hawaii, Indigenous Science and Change. We are thrilled to hear you.
Thank you, Christina. And thank you everybody to being here today. Buongiorno. Buongiorno to all friends, colleagues, students, and new friends. And thanks also to Fondazione Prada for having us here and for supporting and entering into dialogue with us. We as NICHE, we really hope to continue and expand this dialogue on very important issues. Today, I'm here to share with you part of my research that I'm currently conducting in Hawaii Islands. This, what I'm showing today, is in progress research, and it's the first time that I share in public. I think the experience of Hawaii gives us good insights to think at climate. I am a cultural anthropologist, and I study how science is under transformation and how it is transforming our world in times of ecological and social change. In particular, I study how recent knowledge about microbes, we spoke briefly yesterday with Professor Comey about that, about microbes, those microbes that live in, on, and around us, the so-called microbiome. So how this knowledge, this kind of research, are revolutionizing the way we are thinking at ourselves as humans, our relation with the environment, and also the concept of health. Because health is not anymore taught in this new research paradigm as a property of a single organ or a property of a single body, but is more taught as a property emerging from a network of interconnections. I lead a 5-year large European project with different, called Health X-Cross, with different case studies across 4 continents. This is the team that makes this project possible. It's made by 6 anthropologists and 1 visual and art theorist. They work with microbiome researchers in different parts of the world, exploring how they connect, how the scientists connect in different ways the micro scale of microbes with the macro scale of the planet. Within this larger project, my case study initially was based in a cutting-edge, very advanced lab, a lab that is led by technology, that is a leader in the world for the technological improvements and understanding of the microbes. For various reasons, and in a way that was totally unexpected, I ended up following the work of some microbiologists working in Hawaii, who also define themselves as native indigenous scientists. So these are people who are very good in mainstream microbiology. Some of them also earned a PhD in continental US, like in very prestigious universities like Harvard, and then decided to come back to their native islands. After that unexpected encounter with those indigenous scholars, I had to change the entire design of my research. So I still have the case study in the US, but I'm mostly focusing on this case study in Hawaii. So I'm here to tell you some of what I'm learning, not only from microbiologists in Hawaii, but also from scientists in general, and how these can inspire how we think of the climate and act on it. Importantly, I'm not here to translate Hawaiian indigenous people, as many anthropologists in the past did. They don't need that. Rather, I'm learning with them and from them. Hawaii Islands are located in the middle of the Pacific. We saw the bigger map before, and Hawaii are just a bit northern eastern than Marshall Islands, really in the middle of Pacific between United States and Asia. We know, I knew as an Italian Hawaii just as being a paradise, right? A holiday paradise, a holiday destination. But beyond that, I discovered that there is a very interesting and problematic history. The monarchy, Hawaiian monarchy, had to end in 1893 because a bunch of businessmen from United States detronized the queen and transformed the monarchy in the illegal occupation of the United States. Since then, there has been a cultural genocide in the island, revived after the 1970s by what is called the Hawaiian Renaissance, where people more and more understood what was happened and wanted to go back to their heritage. The island is also highly militarized. A big portion of its land is occupied by United States military camps. Hawaii is experiencing the negative effects of climate change with floodings, high waters, and sadly, as we saw this August, also wildfires. These wildfires happened in the island of Maui, in Lahaina. And these disasters are somehow very similar to the disaster that we are experiencing and witnessing in other parts of the world. These are defined as environmental problems, but what really is the environment? Yesterday, Leslie Locke told us about different ways of perceiving the weather and the environment around us in different places. She was comparing UK and Ghana. And also, she pointed out and emphasized about the need to be careful about the words we use. So, the term environment comes from 19th century physics. The term environment has been somehow created by scientists to make sense of a space that could be conceptualized and could be analyzed to see how different forces were acting between different objects. So, the term environment is somehow an invented term, is a unifying concept because the environment includes a lot of elements, and they are physical, but they are also cultural and political. And this unifying concept has been useful to simplify, categorize, and analyze reality. In general, we can say the same concept of nature is not only a fairly recent invention, but also, as anthropologist Descola told us, is the least agreed upon thing in the world. And what about climate? Climate is a word that started to be used in the 16th century and comes from the Greek klima, region, zone. So was this nascent climatic science that tried to understand the weather in relation to regions and zones, geographies. So you see all these ideas we have currently to think about nature, environment, climate. So all these things that surround us and impact on us comes from a very specific cultural way of thinking that is the Western scientific thinking. Historian Deborah Cohen, in this nice book, Climate in Motion, argues that the modern concept of climate as a singular universal thing erases the fact that climate science are obtained by bridging different scales, the local scale with the macro-planetary scale. Rather than looking at the uniform accounts of early climate science in the United States or in the UK, Cohen, the author, looks at how climate sciences emerged in the Habsburg Empire in the 19th and early 20th centuries, an empire made up of distinct kingdoms and regions with a lot of natural and social economic variety. Cohen shows how scientists there in the Habsburg Kingdom invented the climate by bridging the local with the global scale in very particular ways, and how this work of bridging and connecting scale embodied particular kinds of labors and also of artistic imagination, and how the obscure scientists connected, or sometimes disconnected, multiple alternative local knowledge and positions. Obscure scientists scaled up their data and imagination, paying attention to the particularities of very specific places, so connecting their science to interventions in matters of public concern and of economic and political interest. Scaling was not only a scientific exploration, therefore, but a very political one too, and those scientists had to mediate between different ways of measuring the world and were very busy debating about the uncertainties of science in having to consider the social, economical, and political implications of their work. Since the absurd times, much has changed in the climate sciences. And while we are very good at scaling up and see global planetary patterns, we probably have lost part of the capacity to see also the local scale and bridge these different scales. And here comes a why. In a why, indigenous scientists, not only climatologists, are creating a new science by taking seriously the specificity of their local situation in the production of knowledge. And this goes so far to include also historical and cultural specificity of their land. For example, if we take a phenomenon as El Niño, we can go only as far back in the past to have data, about 150 years. Yesterday we have seen with Professor Carlo Barbante, sorry, I have lapsus, that we have data that dates back to 800,000 years. But for certain other kinds of data, we cannot go back to these geological records. So the record we have is much more recent. And so Hawaiian scientists, they go back to their cultural heritage to understand what happened to the climate in the past. They go back to oli, which are traditional chants, moho'olelo, histories, but also to the newspapers, because at the end of the 19th century, Hawaii was one of the most literate countries in the world, and a lot of oral history then was recorded in newspapers. Between 1834 and 1949, intellectuals, political and religious leaders, historians, cultural specialists, and everyday Kanaka, so native, recorded over 125,000 pages of testimony about their lives, lands, La Hui, their nation, and environment in nearly 100 newspapers. Not only all this data not only contain data about the environment and indigenous resources management of their own time, but function and as repositories for deep ancestral knowledge reaching back centuries. And all these data are collected, archived in this Papakilo database, which is a database with all these ancestral knowledge. Because of the significance of culture for making science, the University of Hawaii Manoa, there is this biocultural initiative of the Pacific, an institution made of scientists of every kind, so from the humanities, the social science, and the life sciences, working together. As Pacific people, they say, we need Pacific Island-specific, not continental solutions. Embracing haloaina, the love for the land, will be essential. But because our ecosystems are not the same as Kahiko as in the past, having been degraded by agribusiness, subdivisions, and resort development, Western science also has its role in deconstructing and monitoring altered systems and reconstructing improved systems. So what they are claiming is that they need local solutions. That's why they go back to their past too, but they work in collaboration with dominant Western science, right? But they struggle to work with dominant science in their own terms. So there is this Kulana Nohi, which is a document started to be developed around 2014, in which native scientists illustrates the principle and the approaches, the protocols that Western scientists coming to Hawaii, because many scientists come to Hawaii because Hawaii is one of the places with the highest biodiversity on Earth. So in this document, they explain, they give some guidance on how to approach the island, its resources, how to approach community, how to extract data, how to extract value, how to give back to the community. The name Kulana no Hi was chosen with careful intention to describe how an individual carries themselves, their posture and carriage, as they seek knowledge or information. This concept was inspired by the rigor of hula. Hula, you know, the nice Hawaiian dance, which is not only folklore, is an important cultural practice in Hawaii. It's something that Hawaiians were used since ancient times to relate to natural elements and to know them. There is function, purpose, and intent of the dance layered behind the physical movements. And in some ways, these things can only be conveyed by the poise and attitude that permeates each motion. Kulana no Hi speaks to the poise and attitude that permeates every action and decision in the research process. So what matters in science is not just the results, but how you approach science. If you ask permission or not, how you ask permission, and so forth. So, they say Western science has also its role in deconstructing, but also its role maybe in deconstructing their guiding value and finding new values. The value that guide these indigenous scholars in Hawaii, and here I really just show you a couple because we don't have enough time, are a central concept in Hawaii is kuleana. Kuleana means responsibility, but at the same time it means privilege, taking care of and reproducing life in the environment in which people are born and which has always been, or already been, a synthesis of previous coexistence and conflicts. So it's a responsibility, has some bearing, you know, taking care of someone is always its own cost, but it's also a privilege. Malama means taking care. Taking care does not recognize as a presumed equality to all living species, but postulates a particular status for humans, perceived as interconnected, yes, interconnected in a network of relationship with nature, but towards which we humans have intrinsic responsibilities. So we could see these things, yesterday when Professor Barbante showed us the impact of humans on Earth in the last years. Ahina, that comes from I, it, and na, the source. Aina is the land, is which feeds the source of food, the territory, and it also includes an affective dimension relating to the house and to the living. So you see, these are some of the concepts that permeates Hawaiian science. And with this value, how those scientists make science, how they produce knowledge. First of all, starting from things like that, associations of working the land. When I arrived in the island, they told me, well, fine, you can look at us, work with us, but first things is palm down. Palm down means work on the land, because you have to know the land before wanting to extract value from it, right? And in knowing the land, in working the land, you also know the people. So the land is something that connects people, knowledge, nature, all together. So these are associations of land restoration but also scientific enterprises. This is another one. And yes, some picture from the field. This is me, exactly doing science. This is doing science thinking that, first of all, is palm down, answers to our questions yesterday that after hearing so many bad news, we ask, so what? So what we do? Maybe the best answer is that one, palm down, taking care of the land. This on the right-hand side is kalo, taro, is a traditional plant that now this association try to revive in the country. And all these ideas and approaches, cultural and scientific protocols, are giving way, producing a number of scientific papers. You see, I mean, published in very respected scientific journals. Those are articles that show how to go back to indigenous knowledge can have a say in climate change, for example. Last week, we had the honor and the pleasure to have Tamara Tichting among us. She visited and gave a lecture in the course, in the master course in environmental humanities at Foscari. And so she was discussing with us some of these works. And because we said that we also have to take seriously the words we use, this is also a paper for ecosystemic services. And these scientists were, in this paper, reflect on a different way of thinking and naming what we usually call ecosystemic services. So all these, you know, going back to the land, cultivating kalo, going back to chants, traditions, histories, should not be seen as an escape into the past. Hawaiian scientists are looking to the past to imagine the future. Almost all traditional people conceive time not as a linear thing, but more as a circular process. And usually, the future is imagined in the back, and the past is imagined in the front, because it's the past that guides the future. Hawaiians, too, live in an ancestral future. For example, you see how here, not here, there, at the University of Hawaii, there is an interesting indigenous research office which sits on a quite high amount of funding to put into dialogue this indigenous knowledge with the latest technology. But this should not thought as a matter of integrating, mixing, or just adding normal science to indigenous science. Indigenous knowledge and expertise, so indigenous science, are already inside Western science and technology. Most of scientific discoveries has been done through exploring, mapping, exploiting, and modifying indigenous lands, biodiversity, their knowledge and their labor. So the task at hand for those Hawaiian scientists and other indigenous scientists is to awaken the ancestors, which are already within science, and circuit indigenous patterns through Western technologies. Artist Sara Rosalena, based in Los Angeles and from indigenous origins, shows this concept through her artwork. For example, in this work, entitled Standard Candle, which she exhibits in the Mount Wilson Observatory in Pasadena, in California, this exhibition uses instrumentations and darkness as a lens for examining women's labor and colonialism and their role in the advancement of Western scientific thought and the imagining of space. Standard Candle features a series of woven embedded textiles made using computer code and based on images captured by a 100-inch telescope. Mount Wilson is located in an area previously inhabited by indigenous Tongva people. Throughout the 20th century, Mount Wilson's darkness permitted some among the biggest discoveries in astronomy. Harlow Shapley figured out the size of the Milky Way, and Edwin Hubble calculated the distance from the Earth to Andromeda, changing completely our understanding of the universe. Rosalena shows that these calculations were done by women. We are speaking about the early 20th centuries, called female computers, who were then excluded from history. We just know the name of this important man. Rosalena also shows how colonialism lies within and engulfs the practice of space science. The occupation of such far west lands as California allowed the West, with a capital W, to be far enough away from itself so that native darkness could produce Western knowledge. This resonates with what also Carlo Barbante showed us yesterday. Many climatic measurements are made possible since the 70s of last century by data taken from the peak of Mauna Loa, a mountain in the Hawaii that is very close to another volcano, Mauna Kea, a place that is sacred to Hawaiians, and who, in the Hawaiians, many native Hawaiians in 2019 organized a massive and long-term protest against the plan to build a massive 30 meters lens telescope on the top of Mauna Kea. This was a plan, actually is a plan, that includes the construction of something like a 5 or 7, I don't remember, story buildings. So a massive intervention to explore the universe, maybe to prepare the human escape, because that project would have left another ecosystem destroyed. So this is the protest. And so far, the project is halted. As said, the thing to be done, also in relation to climate, is to recognize this history of colonization within science and transforming the way we usually do science. Not something that is, science is not objective or neutral, and is neither divorced from history, culture, and politics. There is a history, instead, of dispossession and exploitation. And these are the core of science, and also are the premise of its same possibility. So, to conclude, As an anthropologist, I look at Hawaiian scientists as an inspiration to understand how to practice science in a more just way, and all this can give us hope. But the solutions that indigenous scientists are developing are not on the shelves for us to be consumed again. They are not universal recipes, technofixes, magic bullets that can be easily transported everywhere or stolen again. We will need to find our own specificity to reconcile the various scales and places that make up the climate in our part of the world, exploring how we can practice our own somehow problematic indigeneity in a relational way, in a yet unjust world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roberta. Come here with me. And so we have now time for discussion, and I'd like to thank you very much for, first of all, stressing again the importance of words. So how it is important also to revise and words, the language we use, also because we use words that in many, let's say, different disciplinary fields mean also or have different meanings, and also in different regions of the world, of course, they have different meanings. So this is the first point. And then also thank you for bringing up that fundamental question, so what now? What shall we do now? So we had a few days ago, last week, a meeting at Nice, and Giorgio Andreotta Calò, who is a Venetian artist, who is also in the show here at Fondazione Prada, told us, yes, sometimes it's better not to act than to act, because every time we act as human beings, there is the risk we are not sustainable at all. So this is, it's of course, let's say, a question to think about that makes us think more in depth about what also you told us. And so before we open up the discussion to the floor, I'd like to ask you, can we say that, so one of the main differences between the traditional sciences, so what we call the hard sciences, and indigenous science is to put more subjectivity in science. We know that traditional science is objective, no? So mostly. What about subjectivity?
Thank you, Cristina. Do you hear me? So, can I, before answering you, I want to comment on acting, or not acting. Yes, sometimes we are taken by despair, right? Myself too, sometimes I say, better we don't do anything. But
it was not meant as despair.
No, okay, yeah.
It's more, so it's philosophical.
Sure. But what... The fantastic adventure, which is science, includes two different and somehow opposite tension. One is the great capacity, creativity, braveness of humans, of this desire to want to improve things, to heal, to know more, to connect with the mystery of the universe. And the other one is that when this tension, when this desire goes too much, then we can destroy things. So destroy things through a dominative, exploitative attitude. So I think the issue is not to deny science, to cancel science, but is to start from the more precious core and to find ways to not end up in the destructive mode. And I think Hawaiian scientists are showing that. That's why they want to call themselves indigenous scientists, because they do not negate science. They think science is a very important ally of what they want to do, but they are developing ways of bridging these two extremes. So, yeah. And concerning your question, thank you. So, of course, science, well, we have never been modern. We are modern, we are postmodern. We know that science is not objective. For many various reasons, it is the result of our choices, our way of thinking, our cultural framing, the politics, and so on. But I wouldn't just also say that it's only subjective. Of course, the subject makes sense of cultural and political frameworks, but there is always a tension between the individual and the society. So a subject is also a culture. So that's why it's so important to think of science and to practice science in this cultural framework. And that's why we are speaking of a biocultural practice in which the study of the bios cannot be disentangled from the cultural.
Thank you. So Selina is not with us. She had to go. So that's unfortunate, because it would have been also nice to hear also a confrontation between your two papers and also ways of let's say, seeing two different landscapes in the Pacific Ocean and cultural also, let's say, lives there. So I would say that if there are any questions or comments for Roberta, let's hear them.
So thanks for the very interesting presentation. At some point you were saying that knowledge of, let's say, the local and, let's say, interactions with the community are kind of legitimators of the fact that then you can extract information, data, or whatever the researcher needs in his research process. So I would like to understand to which degree you think that, like, knowledge, or knowledge in, let's say, in complement with something else, can legitimate the second part of the process, so the information extraction. And if you see, let's say, this way of legitimizing the research as something that can be standardized in terms of, for example, having a guide which teaches you how you should interact with the locals.
Thank you very much. This is something also we discuss in the course with the students. Yes, I mean, there is a certain formalism. They put a lot of emphasis on protocols, something that I learned there. Because, you know, they have been violated, right? In the Pacific, as we saw with Selina, they have been highly violated on different grounds. So there needs protocols to protect them and to reestablish a kind of order. Then, within the scientific community, there are different positions. There are a number of these documents that I show you. There are others too. And scientists are busy also debating which is the level of these discourses, how much should be taken as rigid rules to be followed or more flexible. Regarding your question if they can be standardized, the fact is that once you have a reflective attitude on your research and you understand that you cannot just go there and take data just because you have written scientists here, right? There is a process to be done. And if you awaken on that possibility and start to see your research in a different lens, then your same research questions and objective might change in the process. So also for that reason, you cannot fully standardize this thing. It's not a checkbox, you know. It's something that is thought to be really transformative. Thanks.
Thank you, Roberta. This is Macarena from the way back. Thank you so much. I really appreciated, your close attention to Kanaka Maoli indigenous practices and forms of scientific research. And I was thinking about the kind of Max Lebrun's idea of pollution as colonialism and a framework that really thinks with scientific imaginaries as either continuing to reproduce colonial frameworks or undoing them. And so that's one set of questions I have for you, and I think in line with the earlier presentation Selina gave us about militarization in archipelagic spaces, in islands seen as vacant spaces of terra nullius, and how those vacancies actually are filled in then with forms of militarization, et cetera. So one comment in question is around the kind of colonialism, coloniality, how to really decolonize knowledge and think with it, and ask you a little bit more about that. And a second kind of comment in question is maybe related. So the study and focus on microbiology is so important in a biodiverse space like Hawaiian, forms of, Hawaiian territories, Kanaka Maoli. I just want to keep being specific about what indigenous group, Kanaka Maoli territories, right, in the Pacific. And I guess what I want to say about that is that the microbiology is not, I imagine, only about organic matter, but considering the plastification of the ocean, considering the kind of deep sea mining that Barbara was pointing to, the kind of other side of, these deep polluted spaces that is the oceanic and the Pacific now, what kind of microbiology emerges after so much pollution, right? That is something I think a lot of people are turning to now, that it's not just to study organic forms, but the kind of adaptation and new forms of life in increasing deadened and plastic oceans. Thank you for listening, and those are my two questions.
So, Macarena, thank you very much for this question and comments. Actually, Max Lebrun, Pollution is Colonialism, is the main book we are analyzing this semester with the class of the Master in Environmental Humanities. So it would be nice if some of my students maybe can answer this. But yeah, you're totally right. I mean, what Lebrun is emphasizing through and through the text is that there is no purity to start with. Also in their work as indigenous scientists, right? So there is no terra nullius, and this does not only apply to colonizers, but apply also to indigenous people and indigenous scientists. So the entire book is a very nice, fascinating, but also very difficult dance between the complexities of wanting to do different science, but at the same time being, as I said before, already engulfed in that exact science. Because science has at its core, this dominative and exploitative somehow framework. And what we are doing in the class is to think through collectively about those things. And the same indigenous scholars are debating these things. Some of them, they have their own ideas and also kind of clear answers. There are many charismatic scientists in the Y. So, and as I said, I'm in the beginning of my journey, research journey there, so I'm learning what is to be in the mid of all that complexities. And also to be in the mid of these changed, polluted world, as it also is in Hawaii. So yes, you are right. Microbiology, as every science, is not universal, has very specific applications in different parts of the world. And in Hawaii, they practice microbiology by always thinking at the impact on the community, and impact on their traditional lands. And the issue of the adaptation is high, of course. Another concept that is important in Hawaii is abundance, because the colonizers' trick was to destroy all traditional practices connected to the land, saying that the land was not fertile. I mean, can you imagine Hawaii? And instead replacing with industrial plantations. And so these scientists are busy, and the microbiologists too, to show the natural abundance of hyena of the land. So also the microbiology there is kind of inflicted by these cultural and political goals. Yeah, thank you.
We have still time for a last question, I think.
Sorry, can I add? And microbes' position are very important, I think, in Hawaiian epistemology, because microbes, and why I like so much microbes, is that they are these really tiny microscopic organs, but that connects everything. Mm-hmm. So relationality is very important. It's very important for Hawaiians' way of thinking. So microbiology, therefore, is also important. Yeah.
I was just curious how you parse the concepts of they and we and indigenous versus Western. I just struggle to figure out even what is indigenous in Hawaii anymore, and how to avoid, in a sense, the same mistakes that we're criticizing in effectively instrumentalizing a view of the society for our own purposes, because often what you hear is indigeneity is a concept imposed from outside. So how do you process that? I saw in your talks you had some very nice elements where you referred to the fact that you're not, romanticizing one or the other, but trying to struggle with this complex landscape. But I was just wondering, for you, how do you even decide what is indigenous in Hawaii, and why does that have a particular, or whoever? I mean, because the culture has been so decimated, and in many indigenous cultures, they just replaced another indigenous culture that was there before them, which doesn't have a voice. So how do you think about those sort of things?
Thank you. So, indeed, there is a complex literature and debate about indigeneity, right? And there are some of this kind of critique, of the risk of re-establishing a reductionistic and also marginalizing way of thinking through the idea of indigeneity. What I can say is that, first of all, indigenous people, scholars in Hawaii are very aware of the limits of the word and the concept of indigeneity. And they admit that they use it in a somehow, in a way that allows them to do what they think is good for them, right? So, first of all, there is this awareness. Secondly, and this is something that I learned soon, what I refer to indigenous people is very different from what we think. One of the first time I was in Hawaii, I was invited at the university in a workshop about conservation biology and indigenous science. And there was the conventional round table of presentation. And many people introduced themselves as indigenous people. And some of them, they look like indigenous, like I, as an ignorant Italian, could figure out an indigenous Hawaiian, and others did not look like. And also, they said, I'm native, I'm indigenous, and my grandparents is from Japan, my mom is from Scotland, or whatever, right? A mixture of heritage. And I was left puzzling, why those people define themselves native, right, or indigenous? And then I had the possibility to ask this to my indigenous friends. And they said, no, we don't use that racist idea of indigenous made by the quantum, the blood quantum. It's nothing about that. It's more how you care for the land. Usually they have one ancestor, at least one ancestor that was there, but also how much the family is a family that has taken care of the land, of the community, and so on. And they are really rejecting this idea of the blood quantum, because this is something that has been introduced by the United States when they occupied Hawaii, and then they discriminated who could vote, people from United States, and who could not vote, the indigenous people, based on blood quantum. So, yeah. So definitely, what you are saying is a meaningful critique. Something is present in Hawaii, and it's something that makes Hawaii a very interesting place to study these transformations. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta. I think we run out of time, so we really thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And before we close this morning section, let's just remind that we have another compelling session in the afternoon with Bjorn Stevens and Macarena Gomez Barris, who participated to our discussion this morning, so please come back. And as a grand finale, we will have the performance by the artist duo composed by Beate Geisler and Oliver Sun, so please join us also for the performance at 4. See you later. Thank you, and yeah, come back.
Hi, welcome back for this last session of the conference connected with Everybody Talks About the Weather, the public program. This afternoon we're going to have 2 speeches and later on a read-on. I'm Mario Mainetti, I'm Head of Research and Publications at Prada Foundation, and I've been involved in this project as Associate Curator of Dieter Roelstraete. Since the beginning, the project was conceived as a multi-chapter activity, and the last of the activity is the conference, and this is the final session. I'm happy to introduce you to Professor Bjorn Stevens. Bjorn Stevens is the Managing Director of the Max Planck Institute for Meteorology, where he leads the Department of Climate Physics. Stevens is interested in how atmospheric water, vapor, and clouds shape climate, globally and regionally. His research has identified different ways in which clouds organize themselves, how varied processes such as precipitation, air-sea interaction, and radiative cooling influence this organization, and how clouds couple to larger scale circulation systems to help determine the pattern of climate change. Professor Stevens is presenting us today a new international initiative proposing to support and give substance to our propensity to talk about the weather.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much. My talk is up there. But before I begin, there's younger people here who I haven't seen before. Are you all here for the dance, or did you come as a group in the front? Okay. That's great. So we'll see if we can explain a few things. First, I wanted to thank the organizers and the creative impulse for the meeting. I went through the exhibit yesterday, and I just think it's amazing how well it's done and the scientific underpinnings for what's shown. And even more amazing is the basic idea that motivates the exhibit. I think it's really terrific, and it overlaps very much with what I ended up wanting to say today. So see if you can draw that out. So my talk, the other thank you is for the organization. The organization's also been terrific. So I don't know if any of the people responsible for the organization are here, but thank you for making it so nice and easy to come here and join this conference. So I want to, in this talk, introduce a new initiative that a number of us developed and proposed in a meeting we had in Berlin in July. Deborah Roberts, who spoke yesterday, was at that meeting. And I will get there in a roundabout way. Before I do so, I should say, unlike many of the other speakers, I don't come from the humanities, so I'm trained as an engineer and physicist, and I tend to work on trying to understand how the climate system works. And so that mostly involves manipulating symbols and mathematical equations and trying to understand the relationship between what we understand about the laws of physics and what that means for how the climate system would evolve. So my work is fairly mathematical and fairly technical. So I thought it's good to start with the origins of the universe and the role that weather plays in it. So this is an image of Adad, or Hadad, which is the forerunner of the modern cow, as I understand it. And the photo I took from the Ishtar Tor, the gate from Babylonia, the 8th gate of Babylonia, that is in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. And I always was fascinated by Hadad. That was the name of my first computer, because as best I could tell, this was really one of the first known gods. So and it was a god of weather and fertility and rain and growth. So there's a deeply human need to understand what's happening with the sky. And you see it in our earliest iconography, is that we're trying to come up with explanations to what is animating the sky. And here we do it in the form of a god who we need to respond to in order to ensure that we prosper as we would like to prosper, because we also understand how sensitive we are as a species to what happens to the sky and the weather that comes from that. You can go a little bit forward in time. There was something else that I learned when I was giving a talk a few years ago about water in the atmosphere. I'm not particularly religious, but the religion is a great inspiration for thought. And the thing that struck me was the Bible and the story of creation. The second day. Does anyone know what happened on the second day? So on the second day, and this is an image from Montreal, above Palermo in Sicily. It's the cathedral there, and it's the tiling. And the image on the right shows, you can't see this in the back, I'm sorry, so I'll read it out for you, and if it's too small, I'll try to do that. But the left is the first day, kind of separating order from chaos and light. And the second is this statement, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from waters. So the idea on the second day, when God created our world, we had to create the sky. And the way the sky was created was to separate one sphere of water from another sphere of water. And this resolved the dilemma of how water falls out of the sky, right? Because you had these two hydrospheres. And so more than the explanation, what I found fascinating by this was the need to explain water in the sky and how the sky is behaving. So it's deeply there. This is visualized also in art, this separation. This is a painting from it says there on the bottom, 1841, from, I think the first name was Ivan Ivazovsky. And it was sort of there's the Turner painting downstairs, if you haven't seen it, of a cumulus cloud. And it's in this tradition of I don't know if this would be romanticism of the 19th century painting where people began painting nature. But in this case, the idea again was to represent this creation scene. I kind of like it because there's sort of a divine-like figure that, the sun kind of comes out of the cloud like a ghost-like, divine-like figure. And it has all the elements that I really spend a lot of my life studying, which is sort of light and clouds and sea. So the point is, we've always looked to the sky as something we're dependent on, as a metaphor, and it goes to something maybe even that you're a bit more familiar with, especially the younger people, is the way that the sky is often ominous. So when we look to the sky, we try to read meaning from it. What does it mean for the future? And there's a long tradition of this as well, if you think about folk tales, and I'll share a couple of them. But one common folk tale, I don't know if you have it in Italian, but you may well, because it's a seagoing, especially a Venetian region, but the red sky at night, sailors' delight, and red sky in the morning, sailor's warning or something like that. And this comes in the Lord of the Rings, if you look here, and I ran it, so I don't know if you know the story. Most of you probably know the story of the Lord of the Rings, but if you don't know, the hobbits are in their little hobbit land, and it's green, and it looks like England, and everything is sort of nice. And then they have to go find the ring, and they set out on this journey. And really before they set out into the lands, they're with the elves at the time. I forget the one elf's name, but they're with the elves. And, they're having a wonderful time, and it's sort of a bit of paradise before they set off. And then they get up, and I think here it says, Frodo ran to the eastern window. That's my eastern balcony window in my apartment in Hamburg. It was a pale morning. In the east, behind long clouds like lines of soiled wool, stained red at the edges, lay glimmering deeps of yellow. Before they had finished breakfast, the clouds had broken into an unbroken roof, and a straight gray rain came softly and steadily down. So you can see that they're about to set off for something momentous. And the sky was for them a symbol of the danger ahead. And it's often that way, and we'll get to that in the context of talking about the weather, because we talk about the weather today in ways which are very different than we talked about it in the past. So how did we talk about it in the past? We've always been talking about the weather, whether it's in an ominous way or not. Sometimes it's just because of, I missed some of the conversations on the first day, but I guess there was a little bit of back and forth about whether or not talking about the weather was it had a certain element of banality. It sort of trivializes things into talking about nothing, as if it doesn't matter. But I wasn't there, so I don't know how the discussion went. But here, this would be an example. It did matter, but it was sort of the weather that you talk about, like, oh my goodness, did you see that? And life is so hard today. So this is a blizzard in New York City in 1888. And I use this image. So if you look on the left, it's the image, and what you see is a lot of people standing around. This is how men work. We mostly just stand around and we talk for a long time and think about what should be done, and that's what they're doing there, without really doing anything. And they're looking at this mass of telegraph lines, because at the time they had set up the telegraph in New York, and how to deal with that. And in the column, the third column in the middle, it says crushed under the snow. And on the right, I blow up another story that came out a couple days later, and it says, in a blizzard's grasp, the worst storm the city has ever known. Business and travel completely suspended. New York helpless in a tornado of wind and snow which paralyzed all industry, isolated the city from the rest of the country, caused many accidents and great discomfort, and exposed it to many dangers. So that's also another way in which we often talk about the weather, is it's just something that comes and is very disruptive. They're not talking about here that this might be the sign of a new ice age. This is just a sort of shit happens sort of discussion going on there. But what's interesting here is when we learn to watch the weather, this was really at a break in time, because when we developed the telegraph in the 19th century, the late 19th century, mid 19th century, we developed a way to communicate information over very large distances. And people realized that if you could communicate information about the weather over very large distances, you could kind of make a geographical map of the weather. And you could say if you're in northern continental Europe, say in Hamburg, and you knew what the weather was like in Edinburgh, then you had an idea of what was coming towards you. That was a little bit more founded than looking at the red sky in the morning or the red sky at night. And so the meteorologists at the time were using the telegraph to provide early warning about storms ahead. So here this telegraph allowed people at this time to have some warning about the storm. But of course the storm interacts with the telegraph too, because it normally breaks down all the telegraph lines. But it shows you a little bit about how if we're informed about what's coming, sometimes we can manage a situation that we can't prevent. And that will be a theme, is that if you get people talking about the weather, in this case a storm, maybe you can minimize some of the greatest harm, and you can take actions to minimize the impact. So when we think about the impact of weather, which is what we talk about now, it's, like I said, they don't say another ice age is coming, which you could have feared at that time, because 1850 was the growth. Down there, you'll see that too. There's pictures of the little ice age. The glaciers in 1850 were coming down the valley. There's many European towns which, were fearing in the middle of the 19th century that they would be enveloped by a glacier. They weren't worried about global warming. It wasn't even really a thought at the time. But Grindelwald, has anybody been to Grindelwald in Switzerland? The glacier came right to the edge of town in about 1850, and then it turned around and went the other way. So you could imagine this could be tinged by that, but it's not. But our conversations today are, and maybe that's a good thing. But as a little trick, I want to ask you something. What do you think of when you think of this day? I think I know what most of you are thinking. How many people died? Does anyone know? I mean, 2023. This year. That's Libya, Derna. And the estimates are over. The estimates that's between 5,000 and 20,000 people lost their lives because of a deluge that overwhelmed poorly maintained dams and led to 2 dam bursts, which flooded the city. It's sort of an example of how everything can go wrong. So on one hand, you could say, well, this wasn't really the weather, it was just human neglect, and that was certainly involved because people had been warning that the dams were unworthy. It probably reflects the international relationships over the past decades, in the sense of what happened in Libya in the deposing of power of Gaddafi and the way this city-state, in a way, within Libya was ruled. But it also reflected the fact that they had a really unusually strong rain, which is something that we expect more with warming. So you see how the weather comes in and plays a role in amplifying all of the other distortions that we have in society. It would be wrong to say that this was a consequence of global warming, but it might not be quite correct to say that global warming had nothing to do with this. And what we will see after the sirens go by is that this will happen again and again as our inability to inform ourselves about maybe our lack of imagination about what could happen leaves us really vulnerable. And in many ways, I think what we lack is a sense of imagination about what the world could be like and what things we could do to smooth its sharpest edges. And I think this is a testament to that. And it's not, this is the latest one, Diana, but if you just go back, these come and they go. But if you break it up, there's 2 other pictures. The floods in Derna, Libya, they had about, estimates are about 200 millimeters, 20 centimeters of rain in about a day. So it's a lot of rain, I don't know, that much rain falling down. It gets collected all in the valleys and funneled into the dams. The dam broke, then the next dam broke, and so it leads to that sort of damage. I don't know how many people remember the floods in China. They might have heard about it vaguely in the back of their head, but this is in the Hebei province of China. And the way they managed the water led to a lot of controversy because they were forced to this decision of, do we sacrifice small towns and make them flood more, or do we let Beijing flood in a way that might put many more people at harm's, at the risk of harm? In this rainstorm, they had close to 1 meter of rain in 24 hours, 5 times as much rain in Libya. So you're from the Alps, in the Italian Alps, and sometimes you get, as you go in this region, you can get 200 millimeters of rain, and when you see it, at least from the Swiss part of the Alps in southern Italy, when it rains there, water just comes out of every crevice and over every waterfall. It just gushes, and this is from a rainstorm of about 20 millimeters. So if you're trying to get people to plan their future, how do you help them imagine that it could be much, much, much more? And what would you do? So how would you imagine the scene on the right? And maybe if people could imagine it a bit better, they might be able to do things that prevent catastrophes like that. There was the other one about a week ago in New York last Sunday. So they had, 10 centimeters of rain, but it was, a major city stopper, and people were asked not to go out of their houses, and the subways were flooding, and it was a major disruption. But again, imagine if you had 10 times as much rain falling in New York. How would you imagine that? You just can't. I don't know how to do that. You just say, well, that's big. We always hear people throw these numbers out at you, and you say, well, that's a big number. How many? We had it today or yesterday with the glaciers melting. How many swimming pools? Yeah, but where does that, for me, it's just it's a translation of one number into another number. It doesn't feel real because I don't see swimming pools sort of evaporating every minute. It just says it's a lot, and it's a different way of saying it's a lot. And so I think what we miss is an ability to imagine how the world would be. And here, when we see things like this, we think in our back of our heads, this is what's to come, but we don't really know what it means, and it leaves a lot of anxiety in the room. And that anxiety is also exploited. So the other thing you see in the news are things like this. So the newspapers love these ideas of tipping points. The tipping point discussion is a largely constructed and scientifically unfounded narrative that most people don't appreciate. But the science can't rule it out. That's why it thrives. So when you look at the scientific literature on these ideas of sudden ice sheets melting or a stopping. This middle paper happened about a month ago, and it was in the press everywhere. It was talking about the halting of the overturning circulation in the Atlantic. 2 months before that, there was another paper which was very carefully went through and showed that the indicators for that happening are all counterindicative, that there's really no strong evidence that this would happen. That paper got absolutely no press. This one was in the paper everywhere, and so if you're a normal person, you're not only trying to figure out if the red sky in the morning is really a warning, or if the floods in New York could look like the floods of Hebei. In the back of your mind, you're being triggered to think that the apocalypse is on its way. So, what does that do to a society? On one hand, you could say, well, it mobilizes people to take action. But I think it also causes confusion and despair and anxiety in ways that might not be the most constructive. So how can we talk about the weather in ways that actually help us prepare and help us minimize the future changes as much as possible? So that's what I'm trying to get through here. It turns out that we don't want to just do that. We don't want to talk about the weather just to avoid catastrophe. We also are quite practical about it. So here's an example of a week of headlines in the New York Times. And they really talk about very just practical things that we have to think about as the world warms. So the one is how people are, migration in the sense of sort of rich people migration, how people with money are moving to places where they think